All right, everybody, welcome back to the Millennial Sales Podcast. This is episode 199. Shit, we're close to a milestone, people. Really excited for this week's podcast. Really excited to be here with y'all, posting this on a Friday morning, getting fired up. So I hope everyone had a great January. I hope for the folks out there that their fiscal year ended in January, that you got some end of year magic. If not, hopefully some end of month magic. And we're kicking off February with a great episode here. Before I get to today's guest, let me just tell you very quickly that this is episode 199. I've been doing this for 3.5 years. The way that you can help support this podcast, if you find value, head over to Apple Podcasts, hit review, 5 stars, leave a nice comment. That helps more than anything else to help grow this show. It helps me get better guests and ultimately create a better show for you to add more value to your life. The whole point of the show is helping young sellers in their career up-level their skills, hit quota, career tips, have a fulfilling career, make more money, get promoted, everything that you want as a young seller, with some good stories and maybe some laughs along the way. So please, if you could support the show, share it with a friend, be a friend, tell a friend. Go to Apple Podcasts. If you want to learn more about me or the show, I'm on all social media, but Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, I'm Tommy Tahoe. LinkedIn, I'm Tom Alemo. I love hearing from people that watch the show or listening to the show. They have comment, they have feedback, they know of a good guest, whatever it might be, hit me up. I'd love to hear from you. And without further ado, let me get into today's guest, which is an awesome episode. Ryan Heaphy, my guy, the director of sales at Qualia. If you don't know Qualia, they recently raised a $65 million Series D and boom, hit unicorn status, valued over $1 billion. So that happened after we did this interview. So Ryan noted that they were, pre-unicorn status. They are now post-unicorn status, and Ryan's an absolute baller. Let's put it simply, he is focused on creating the Navy SEALs of sales teams, right? Disciplined, focused, powerful, structured, successful team in Austin, Texas. And a lot of the listeners of the show probably know Scott Leese from the SaaS world. He was on the show a few months ago, one of the most downloaded episodes that I have. And I asked him on the podcast, who's one of the best sales leaders you know that people maybe haven't heard of or doesn't have a big LinkedIn presence or whatever it might be. And he gave one name and one name only, Ryan Heaphy. And once you listen to this episode, you'll know why that is the case. You'll know why Scott recommends him so highly. You'll know why he's the director of sales at one of the fastest growing SaaS companies in the world. You'll know why he completely flipped his career from someone that quote unquote needed help closing the front door to being a very successful sales leader. So here's a few things we talk about. He pulls a millennial move by spending the first year post-grad living in the Caribbean, working at a hotel. We talk about how he went from being a failure in sales, someone that was not very good, or maybe failure's too strong, maybe average at sales, to who he is today. We talk about how to perform at that highest level possible in sales, right? How do you become the Navy SEAL of sales, the all-star, the A+ player that consistently hits numbers and gets promoted and makes more money? I mean, this guy's the real deal. He talks about how having a son earlier in his career really changed his life and was a huge pivot point for him. So if any of that is interesting, if any of that is relevant to you, I think you're going to love this episode with Ryan. I don't have anything else to say. I think you're going to really dig the conversation. Ryan's a great dude. If you enjoyed the conversation, again, you know how to support me, but you can hit up Ryan Heaphy on LinkedIn. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you about what you thought of the episode. If you're trying to learn how to be a great salesperson or sales leader, he's definitely someone I would connect you with. So check him out. Without further ado, you're not here to hear me ramble. You're here for some good content. So let's get into this conversation with my friend, Ryan Heaphy. Let's go. Ryan Heaphy, good morning. How you doing, man?
Good morning. I'm doing well. It's an honor, Tom.
We were just saying anyone that passes the Scott Leese bar of acceptance and recommendation is someone that is welcome on this show. I asked him, who is someone that you don't hear a lot about, that isn't all over LinkedIn, that isn't all posting all over the place, that is just a really great sales practitioner, sales leader, someone that the audience needs to hear from. And you were the only name that he mentioned. So I know he'll be excited to hear this episode.
Yeah, Scott's a good buddy of mine, and we've worked together at a couple of different companies over the years. And he was actually the person who gave me my very first start in sales. So it's kind of a serendipitous.
That's great.
Yeah.
And well, I want to get into that, but before we do, you have an interesting start to your career that I'd be remiss not to bring up, right? So, at least from LinkedIn, it looks like you graduated school in 2012 and spent a year as the concierge at the Ritz Carlton in St. Thomas. So, we got to get into that, and maybe can you talk about what was that decision making process like coming out of school, and what made you do that type of a drastic move from maybe the more typical traditional path of getting into a 9 to 5 type of job elsewhere?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's probably what a lot of people go through when they're coming out of school. I graduated from University of Central Florida, got my degree in political science. Had really no interest in pursuing anything in politics. I just found while I was in school that it was a topic that was relevant. It had an effect on my life. It was something I was interested in. But of course, coming out of school, you're always like, what do I do now? So St. Thomas, yeah, it was kind of a wild move. I ended up kind of just selling everything I had and applied for the job and got it and decided to go that route. So while I was living in St. Thomas, I worked at the Ritz Carlton. Um, it's kind of hard for them to keep staff out there because it's a remote island, so it's difficult for them to keep employees. So really, you end up wearing a lot of different hats. I mean, I was uh, running drinks at the pool. I was doing things on the beach. But outside of what you might call my day job at the Ritz Carlton, I was also working at basically like a fancy kind of wine lounge restaurant. And so I would, finish up midday at the Ritz Carlton after starting an 8 a.m. shift. I'd get out on my paddle board for maybe an hour, jump into my next set of clothes, go work at this other place. And at about 11 o'clock at night, every night, that place would sort of shut down their dining and become more of a more of a lounge type vibe. And I would DJ there until about 3 o'clock in the morning, and then start all over again. I was working three jobs around the clock, but the beauty again is that even if it's an hour break that you catch, you're on vacation in the Caribbean, man. So it was.
That's a cool that's a cool life. Did you have trouble, because it is more of that remote destination for travelers? Did you have trouble like making friends or finding people to hang out with, or would you hang out with tourists, or what was that like?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Surprisingly, no. I made a lot of friends. As you can imagine, there were a lot of people like me at the time who were, mid 20s and, um, just trying to figure out what the next thing to do was. So some of them were boat captains, and the other ones were bartending and doing whatever. But a good buddy of mine that I made while I was living out there. Um, Part of what he did on the island is he would book bands for bars and restaurants and things like that. And stateside, of course, Florida is one of the closest places to that region. And he ended up booking a bunch of bands that were musician friends of mine from Florida. So I actually had friends kind of touring through while I was staying there. It was a good time. It was pretty good.
Nice. That sounds, and like, the show's called Millennial Sales. There's nothing more millennial than, graduating from college, going to St. Thomas and working three different jobs there and just kind of living there for a year and kind of taking that, just taking your path off of what the traditional thing would do once you graduate school. So I love that. How did you then go from there to into sales? What was that transition? Was it like, all right, I've done this for a year, I'm not going to do this forever type of situation, or was it a financial concern, or what kind of brought you back to the United States?
Yeah, I think, again, living out in the Caribbean is awesome. It's beautiful. But as you can imagine, there's not a lot of opportunity. Like unless you're staying in hospitality, or you are rich enough to vacation there 6 months out of the year, which a lot of people do too. Um, there's not a career coming at you, basically. And working 3 hours around the clock, or three jobs around the clock, whatever amount of hours a day that is obviously exhausting. And what began to happen would be that companies would be sending their sales teams out to the Ritz-Carlton for their President's Club. And I would be, catering to these people, hanging out for them while they stayed for a week. I was getting job offers left and right to go join, uh, Edward Jones and all these financial companies offering me opportunities. And I think it kind of just spurred in my mind that I was tired of serving, and one day I wanted to be served, and that I'd have to, go out and really make something of myself. So after about a year, I moved back to Florida and kind of regrouped, if you will, and ended up putting out job applications pretty much all over. I mean, all over Austin, I was interested in, some in Colorado, very millennial of me, uh, and ended up getting an interview. A Skype interview with Scott Leese, and after the conversation, he basically said, the job is yours if you want it, come on out. And so I once again sold everything I had, packed it all into my car, put my dog in the car, and drove out to start on a Monday with not even anywhere to live just yet.
Man, that's crazy. So what made you not want to take those jobs that were being offered to you at, say, Edward Jones? Was it that you just weren't quite sure, that like sparked the thought in your mind, and you weren't quite sure at that point, or you just weren't interested in that type of sales, or why did you not go with them?
I think part of it was that I just didn't really even at the time like know much about those type of companies and what they did. The other thing is, you also don't know how serious someone drunk on the beach at President's Club is about offering you a job.
Yeah. I know my former CEO is just an ultimate sales guy at heart. So any President's Club, any dinner with a client, any stop to Starbucks, there's always a potential job offer or something going in, or some kind of a recruiting session happening. So I know the type, but that's awesome. So I love the story of you. So you're coming in, and you have the Skype interview with Scott, the job's yours, you move on out again. I want to read something for you, and get your perspective. So I'm on your LinkedIn,
Okay.
and I could see a recommendation from Scott Leese. And first of all, Scott's just going to love how much we're talking about him, I'm sure. But he said, I have worked with Ryan at two companies, and he's been two different people. Who he is now is a testament to the amount of effort and energy he's put forth into growth and personal development. He went from a rep who needed my help to close the front door at Company A to somebody fundamentally vital to the success of our sales org at Company B. I can confidently say that his maturation and ability are top 5 success stories I've been witness to. He's going to make one hell of a VP of sales in the near future, and just keeps getting better. Uh, says one or two more sentences and says, I could not recommend Ryan strongly enough. So, whew,
Man.
um, powerful words from someone that has seen probably his fair share of success stories. And your top 5 all time, he's saying, and quite a drastic difference. So, walk me through that. Walk me through the difference of the Ryan that walked in Company A, couldn't close the front door, to Ryan at Company B that's helping to drive the revenue at one of the hottest, fastest growing companies in the country or in the world.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I was actually watching your episode with Justin Welsh recently, and although he and I have never met, never spoken, or anything like that, I actually really identified with this same sort of question that you asked him. I think it was just a combination of a number of different factors. You know, my first opportunity under Scott was at a company called Outbound Engine. A lot of people know it. It's a transactional sale. It's high velocity. It was an extremely large sales floor of about 100 reps, very high rep turnover, pretty cutthroat, right? So that's where I learned a lot of the basics and kind of had my sales boot camp and worked my butt off making 150 calls a day and all that fun stuff. And to be really candid, I was number one rookie in my class and all that good stuff, but I was extremely streaky. I'd have a fantastic month followed by two terrible months, followed by a great month, followed by two terrible months, and that's just the kind of rep I was. I think a lot of it had to do with I was doing what I was told to do to be successful, but I think deep down it hadn't really clicked. Um, and I could probably elaborate on that more, but I was doing what I was told and it was working, but I'm not sure I really understood what I was doing. And so, moving out of that role, I guess to fast forward, moving out of that role, some things happened in my life. I ended up having a child. I have a 4-year-old son now, and things like that really tend to change your perspective. I think for me, one of the biggest things that changed is, you kind of, I'll speak to the millennials here. You kind of go through most of your life feeling like you're a kid, right? And then you come out of college and you still kind of feel like you're a kid in the job industry. Everybody's senior to you, everybody has more experience than you. And I think that can really um, prevent young sales reps from having the confidence and conviction that they need to influence people who are particularly their senior, if not by age, by experience in whatever particular market they're in. So all that's to say, when all of a sudden there's a new life on the line that you're responsible for, I think a lot of that fear and feeling inferior kind of goes away, and you can step into this level of confidence where it's like nobody can tell me nothing. So I think that kind of helped me personally develop into somebody who was just had a lot more conviction in what I was doing and what I was saying. And as I moved out of my role at Outbound Engine, I ended up working at another company with a totally different vibe. It was 4 sales reps in sharing an office space with a law firm in an old historic house in downtown Austin. And unlike kind of how Outbound Engine operated like a well-oiled machine and you kind of just fit into the machine and do what's already running, this other opportunity had like practically nothing built. So it really took me to be successful to I really had to like do a lot of other stuff that I had never done before, like pieces of sales operations, pieces of lead generation, things like that. And I think having the opportunity to really take ownership in everything made so many things click for me and actually understand why and what I was doing in my sales process. And yeah, I think that was kind of a big turning point to where I wasn't just doing what I was told. I was creating and actually like empowering what we were doing.
Yeah, and I love the thought of the change in perspective with your son, right? Like cold calls can be scary,
Yeah.
but you know what's scarier? Like not being able to, afford his next meal or be able to pay for, his clothes down the line or his school or whatever, all those things that I'm sure pop into your mind as a new parent, of all the things that are now super important to you that weren't even on your mind, a year ago, probably. So I'd have to imagine, I don't have kids, but I have to imagine the tremendous shift there. And I even feel that as someone that, I recently got engaged to my girlfriend. And so even just knowing that is like that's a commitment, right? That like I've made and I'm going to continue to make, is like things become a little bit more real. and like you do start to think about the future more. And I think there's a lot of power in that you can overlook some of the things that may have caused you to procrastinate before, or sweating the small stuff before, and helps you to really kind of consider the big picture. And I would imagine that having children is probably an additional level of that.
Absolutely. I mean, to elaborate on the way you put it, I think a lot of people had their own reasons for doing whatever, their own reasons for wanting to be successful, their own reasons for being committed. And I think that prior to that, maybe I struggled with having anything at stake. It's kind of just me, and I'll be fine, and I'll get by, and then all of a sudden you have so much at stake, and the mindset kind of shifts to, I owe this little dude every single minute of my waking day, and I'm gonna make it happen. And so it's a good empowering feeling, and I think it did a lot for me for sure.
So, and when you talked about how you, in the second company that you were at, there was a lot less process. You had to figure out how to do things that are outside of, or were outside of the scope of your first sales job, and maybe outside of the scope of just bigger companies, more well-oiled machines. And
Mhm.
could you give some more detailed examples? Because I think there's probably a lot of listeners that maybe they're working for one of those oiled machines, and they say, oh, maybe it'd be interesting to be one of the first AEs at a company, or go somewhere that's a seed stage or a Series A company, because you want to be part of that growth engine. But there are those other responsibilities. So maybe you could elaborate on any of the stories, or anything in particular that you did, that was probably outside what you thought the normal scope of a sales rep would be.
Totally, yeah. So, the company that I don't mind mentioning, they're a great company. It's called Rev. They basically provide transcription, translation, and closed captioning services. And what's interesting is, being placed into that role, anybody you can think of who can use those services could be a customer. So then you start running your brain. Okay, closed captioning services. I can contact universities for their online learning programs. I can contact broadcast television stations. I can contact, and you start to think of all these things. And so, previously, a day in the life was I had a dialer and everything was loaded in there, and I press go and I'm on the phone with somebody. you know and then now I'm basically given free reign to like decide who your customer profile is going to be and get after them. And so I asked for a license for Zoom info, and I started building lists by category of what type of business. um, and I think another aspect, again, when you're just kind of smiling and dialing through a dialer, you don't really have to think about pipeline management and at what stages different prospects might be in. But in the absence of that, you now have a whole system of record in Salesforce or whatever you're using, hundreds and thousands of leads, and it's like you have to find a way to manage them all properly. So you have to label them, you have to create stages, you have to bucket them and keep them organized. So I would say like that was my first scratch on the surface of learning what pipeline management even was. And I kind of just had to figure it out. And to this day, I'm huge on pipeline management and forecasting and all that stuff. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think those are a couple examples of just things that immediately had to level up, and in a lot of ways, I had to learn myself. Even at this time, there was no sales leadership, and our VP of sales was in San Francisco, while the 4 or 5, 6 of us were here in Austin. So we were just kind of winging it.
Like lone wolfing it a little
Yeah.
bit. So did you have, at an earlier stage company like that, were there any issues or challenges as it relates to like quota, for example? And my imagination is like, if you're coming from somewhere that they're still building up the engine, they might not know what a salesperson's quota should be, right? If you're going at that type of hyper growth where it's like it's way under or it's way over, or because you do have to spend so much time doing all those kind of extracurriculars outside of the normal calls to, prospects and building proposals and all the other things that you need to do. I'm just curious, was that ever something that came up as a challenge, or not really?
I'd say it somewhat was. I mean, in my first week or two, I broke the model. I flat out just broke what they told me to do, because I had figured out another way to do it, by basically like thinking of markets that they hadn't thought of to reach out to, and then I built out a list, pulled everything in from Zoom info, pulled it in from LinkedIn. Um, and just like, I was working till 7 o'clock at night every night, just pounding away. And then it was all green field. It just gobbled it all up. So immediately broke the model, and they definitely had to adjust to find some sort of middle ground of where the goal should be. Um, but yeah.
And I like the thought of, I heard someone use this word. I don't even know if it's a real word, but intrapreneurship, right? Instead of being an entrepreneur where you start your own company, it's like you bring that entrepreneurial mindset internally to a company, and it sounds like that's what you did there. It's like, well, here's what we do, and but really, here's just the goal, and find a way to get there. And it sounds like you just, even in the first 2 weeks, we're like, "Yeah, this old, the old playbook here. Let's throw this thing out. There's a whole new way that we can go about doing this." So I think that's something to highlight again for people that, um, let's say that in your mind that the current playbook's not working for you, to try to come up with solutions. And I think the beautiful part of being a salesperson, if you have the right leader that lets you be autonomous, is that you can use your creativity to try to find another way. As long as you get to the ultimate goal, there's a lot of different paths that can get you there.
Absolutely. I mean, I think in this particular instance, I wouldn't say that it was a freedom granted by leadership. I think it was more of an absence of leadership that, birthed the opportunity for me to be able to do that. And I will say, fast forward all these years now being in sales leadership, one thing that I advise a lot of people against is coming in and trying to reinvent the wheel right off the bat, because you know, take Qualia, for example. We've been selling this product for 4 years, and we're on a really hot streak, a really hot roll right now. So one can imagine we kind of know mostly what we're doing. But that said, I can truly say that I rely on sort of the creativity and the ideas that come from my team, my reps. I want to hear that all day long. If they have an idea of a different way we could prospect, a different way we can do something, I want to know about that stuff. But I don't want it to be just kind of done ad hoc, because you miss the opportunity to track it, to measure it, to see, is it truly successful, or is this kind of a one-off case that you thought worked? And then if we find something by measuring it and tracking it that it is truly a more effective or a successful way to do something, we're obviously going to want everybody to start doing it that way and scale it out. So definitely, I mean, for other listeners out there, if you have ideas, you should bring those to your leadership, but present to them a way that maybe you can measure or track your idea to prove that it's actually successful. And if you could do that, they'll definitely be smiling at you.
So you brought up Qualia. I want to get into that because it's such a great success story. I'm curious, was Scott running Qualia when you first landed there, or
He
did he
was.
come after? Because I'm imagining you, right, as the first company that, Scott said, maybe you learned on the fly a little bit, but he said, he needed my help to close the front door. And then it sounds like over time you transitioned to who you are today, and grew, and went through a lot of personal development. So I guess my question is, what did Scott see in you if he recruited you that second time, or hired you the second time? What do you think he saw in you at that point that made him want to take another shot with you?
You know, um, this is a fun part of the story. This is a good part of the story.
All right, let's do it.
I would say at that time, Scott and I had a bit of a complicated relationship. I had been in his office many a time for not the greatest of reasons as it related to my performance over the years. And candidly, he had reached out to a friend of mine about Qualia and basically said, I'm putting together a team, blah, blah, blah. The friend of mine was comfortable where they were at and really had no interest in taking it and mentioned it to me. And I was really interested in it you know, for long story short, all the reasons that I felt were lacking at the company or position I was in. And so I basically called Scott and told him that I was interested in the role he had offered to this other person. And if I could recall, his response was probably something like, "What's going to be different this time?"
Yeah.
So at that point, I really had to resell Scott on myself. But as we have described here, a lot had changed for me already. I had started a family. I was working my butt off. I was really successful in the role I was in. As I mentioned, I'd broken the model. I was doing so much. And whatever it was that I said at the time convinced him to give me the opportunity. So I ended up starting as an AE with the first 12 hires in Austin for Qualia. And at that time, that's all we had in Austin was the 12 of us and Scott. So that was
What
kind of the
what's
beginning.
and what's it like working for him, especially like I imagine that you may have maybe had a short leash the second time around, right? You had to kind of sell him on getting in there. And so he may have had his eye on you and said, "All right, I'll take you for your word, but I got my eye on you." But I don't know. I'm just assuming that might be the case, whether he said that or not. Like, was he a hard ass? Was he really trying to like inspire people a lot and like give speeches a lot, or like what was it like to work for
Yeah, he'll probably kill me for saying this, but
him?
definitely, there's a reputation surrounding Scott that he's a hard ass and he'll yell at you and blah blah blah. But the reality is, deep down, he's a big soft teddy bear and he's passionate about stuff like the next
Oh,
guys.
hold on. We've got to. I just got to make sure everyone that knows Scott, shoot him a message. Let him know that Ryan called him a teddy bear. I want 100 messages in his inbox today that call him a teddy bear. All right, you could go on.
Yeah, he's gonna love that. But if I think about Scott as my buddy and mentor and whatever he is to me, I think he's probably had a little bit of a development himself. He was at Main Street Hub and Outbound where he was doing leading a very cutthroat type of sale for a huge sales floor. I mean, it's almost impossible at that point for him to even know every face that is on the team, and so it takes a little bit. I think it takes a little bit more discipline and a little more seriousness to manage all that. But moving to Qualia, the way that he used to describe it, and this resonates with me to this day, and I still explain this to my team, is what he actually told me was, I'm putting together this team. It's not going to be 100 people, grinding on a sales floor. It is going to be, 10 to 12 of the Navy SEALs of salespeople in Austin. We're going to be the best team, and we're going to grow this thing massively. And I keep that in mind to this day. That I want my team at Qualia to be the Navy SEALs of salespeople in Austin. Um, but yeah, so I think that obviously 12 people versus 100 people is a lot more of an intimate team. We had the opportunity to do, I think, one time we did a panic room type of scenario with him. And it's just a lot more different vibe of leadership. So I would say he got a little soft on us, but in a great way. In a great way. I still, Scott's attitude is kind of just show me what you can do. He's not somebody who micromanages and gets on you. So, you do have sort of that extended leash to just go out there and prove results. And then, he wants you to come to him with anything that he can help you with. He's not going to jump down your throat to provide it. So
Yeah. And so when you talk about nowadays, you're continuing to keep in mind like, hey, you want to build the Navy SEALs of a sales team. What stands out to you as some of those characteristics. When I think about a real Navy SEAL, when I think about anyone in the military, everyone, is super impressive. And that's what they, it just, the courage and the stamina and everything that you need to be in the military is amazing. And then the Navy SEAL is like the top echelon, physically, mentally, emotionally, strategically, skill wise. Like it's just the elite class. So when you think about the Navy SEAL for sales, like what are some of the characteristics that stand out to you as someone that would fit that profile?
Yeah, totally. There's a lot of parallels you can draw, and hopefully I don't offend anybody out there because clearly I'm not in the military and stake no claim to it. But there, if you think about all the things that kind of go along with being somebody who's in the military, it's like you make your bed every morning, right? Because that's just what you do. It's discipline. It's having a process. It's all that. And I can parallel that to, you prospect every single day. It's just what you do. There's no second guess about it. You don't have to think about it. It becomes robotically like something that you have to incorporate in your every single day. Um, but to answer your question a little more specifically, going back to kind of what you mentioned about being an intrapreneur, before I joined on to Qualia, while I was kind of waiting for my start date, I had asked, what are some things that I can start to do in the meantime? And rather than giving me, product information or any of the stuff I would inevitably learn, he told me to read the book Extreme Ownership by Jocko. And that book is all about taking ownership in every single thing that you do, every single aspect of your life. And what you end up finding is the more that you can have that internal locus of like everything is in my control, everything is my responsibility. You find that you can influence so many areas of your life that you thought were kind of just happening to you before. So I guess getting back to the question here, having that mentality of being a Navy SEAL, it means you have to be disciplined, you have to work your butt off, you have to take ownership. Um, Especially when you're building a young company, it's not like you're being handed something where it's just like, oh, we've already done all this. Here's the rewards. Like we're building the thing from scratch, and the rewards will probably come way, way later. So
Yeah.
yeah.
What are some areas that sales reps, your salespeople usually don't take ownership in, or maybe you didn't in the past, and that book kind of illuminated to you?
I think one of the biggest ones, and certainly for me, is using your resources. I mean, I won't say every company, but I would say most company spends tons and tons of time and money to provide resources for employees that never get used. So for example, like one thing that I did when I joined on the Qualia, we have a head of sales operations. Her name is JM Wilkie, and she is fantastic. She was formerly an SDR manager. She is a sales operations wizard. She is an optimizer. She's a sales enablement gal. But when I was selling as an AE at Qualia, I booked every single week. I had a reoccurring meeting with JM for her to basically look into my accounts and my contacts and my leads, help me identify any blind spots, help me identify if I had any sort of clogs in my funnel, so to speak. And it was just something that I religiously did, and I came prepared for her. I didn't just like sit there and be like, tell me what you want to tell me. Like I came prepared with action items of how, what I wanted to know. And eventually, after having those meetings for so long weekly, I knew now I had all that information. I actually, sorry to say, Jam, at one point I didn't need her for that anymore because I had learned it. And I couldn't be doing the role that I'm doing today without having learned all that from her. But all that's to say, I can't say that at the time that all my peers were doing that exactly either. They just left that blind spot there. They left that opportunity on the table. And so whatever company you're at, whether it's your sales manager, your sales operations person, um, customer success people who probably know the product on a deeper level than you, all those people are there. All it takes is for you to ask for their time and be intentful with it. Be intentful with what you want to get out of that time and what you want to learn. And I promise you, you'll learn so much more than waiting for that training to be scheduled for you, or waiting for them to be like, recognize a problem and then try to provide a solution. So it's kind of like, I think it was John Barrows. I watched your John Barrows episode too, and he was talking about how, you can get an entire Harvard education online for free. You're not going to get a diploma, but the information is there. You just, you got to be intentful with getting it. And I think within a sales org, that's true for any rep.
And maybe outside of your direct manager, I hate to break it to people, but people aren't really thinking about you. They're not really thinking about your quota. Your sales ops person, your customer success manager, they have all their other parts of their job and responsibilities that they have. So they're probably not going to come to you and say, "Hey, Tom, the AE here, let me proactively come to you with some ideas of how you can sell more." That's just probably not going to happen. But if you reach out to them and are proactive about it, and to your point, can prove that the time that you're spending together is valuable, you're prepared, you're ready, you have some idea of where you want to take it, you have an agenda, you're following through on the action items that you take. People are going to want to spend more time together because they know that you're taking action on it, and they can see that it's directly benefiting everyone around in the company, and it's helping to grow things. So I think it's just another example, a great example of taking ownership over everything in you could try to do everything in your life. Maybe you start with everything in your sales process, and you can work outside of that, because that's hard enough. You mentioned that early in your career you were streaky.
Yeah.
And you've also mentioned that over time you're mentioning the process a lot. One of the things that you mentioned in your LinkedIn bio is that you have a rigid sales process. You're focused on a rigid sales process. So walk me through maybe why you think you were so streaky early on, and like what were some of the gaps that you had to fill, and maybe other common gaps that reps have to fill. I would imagine that I see oftentimes, this has happened to me, where you kind of go on a roller coaster, right? Like you're prospecting, building up the pipeline, then you spend a month closing everything, and you weren't prospecting. So then you have to start back at zero, and then you're not closing, and then you're kind of going up and down based on when you're prospecting and when you're able to close, depending on your sales cycle. So I don't know if it was that or anything else, but I'd love to hear about your rigid sales process and how you go about that for you and your team.
Yeah. I'll start. I'll backtrack to one of the underlying questions there. I would say, part of being streaky in my first sales role, probably a lot of it had to do with, again, just not really understanding fundamentally what pipeline management meant, how to do it. I think at that time, again, in a super transactional environment, it's pretty churn and burn. It's like, I'm gonna call this guy, and he's either gonna hang up in my face because I'm gonna push him to the point of he's either gonna buy or he's gonna hate me for the rest of my life. And that's I just didn't know any better. I knew I wanted to fight in the conversation, and I would fight, and sometimes I would actually fight and become very abrasive. Again, didn't know any better. And what I didn't realize is that some of the top performers, most of a huge amount of their deals were people that were kind of in that middle stage of a funnel, where they were following up over time. Maybe it took 3 months, 6 months, sometimes it was a year. But that mid funnel eventually becomes a converted deal if you're managing it right. And for me, I don't think I ever had a middle part of the funnel. They're either brand new and straight to close, or they're brand new and not talking to me again. So obviously, as your sale becomes more and more sophisticated, when you start selling to bigger organizations, more prestigious or more organized buyers, you have to have that. I mean, there is no deal that goes straight from first call to a close. You have to kind of walk them through these stages. So that I think that was probably one of my biggest gaps at that time.
Yep.
Um, remind me the second half of the question.
So yeah, I guess the second half would be, when you talk about a rigid sales process, if there's anything that, stands out from, your team or people that you work with, or even just from what you hear around the grapevine of like things that where reps tend to fall short in the process, and where you really, if you have any strong beliefs on, hey, reps should really be doing this a lot more frequently, or here's kind of a common problem that I come across or our team comes across as it relates to the sales process. And this is even just a selfish question for me. I always have a selfish section of the interview, but trying to treat more like sales more like a science. And I think there's an art form to it too, but really trying to dial in on the science of like the process and guiding them through that. So I'm just curious if there's common pitfalls that you come across.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the probably the easiest part to look at in having a rigid process is just good time management. Again, talking about being streaky, it's the age old curse of sales reps that once they start working deals and closing deals, they stop prospecting, and then the deals dry up, and they're like, oh crap, I got to get back to work. And then they do some prospecting, build a little pipeline, stop prospecting, work on that. So you have to manage your time. You have to block your calendar, have that religious hour or two every day where you make new calls, have that religious hour of the day where you do calls to like your building interest type of stages. Have a period of the day where you realistically at the end of the day block an hour of your time to prepare for tomorrow. So many people walk in, or I guess sit down in their living room like me, walk in the morning, and then they sit down in their seat and they're like, okay, where do I start? But you could be so much more successful if you take the time at the end of the day to build your lead list, figure out who you're going to call, make a plan, and then you sit down and you're right after it. So I think time management needs to be rigid. But the other probably more important part, not more important, but equally important part is pitches. I'm very big on pitches, and there's a lot of bad ones, a lot of bad ones. And what you end up finding is that not a lot of people really have a plan in the conversation they're trying to have when they're pitching on a cold call or whatever kind of call it is. You'd be surprised how many of them are like, let me tell you, sorry I'm bothering you. I know I'm calling you out of the blue. Here's my company name. Here's what we do. Can I have 15 minutes? And it's like, that's not a pitch. That's not a plan. What do you, there's, that you're not accomplishing anything. So one thing that I carry on from Scott Leese to this day, probably a lot of people on here have read his book Addicted to the Process, and the sales process is essentially pain, value, urgency, solution in that order, and that's kind of like the underlying model for the conversation you want to have. So, for an example, rather than jumping into a call and saying, um, hey, I'm Ryan Heaphy. I work with Qualia. We do title software. Let me tell you all about title software. It's more about you jump in and ask directly questions that would uncover pain points without apology, without permission to ask those questions. You jump right into finding pain points. That's the whole reason for the conversation. If you're not going to solve anything for them, they don't owe you any time at all. So once you've found that, uncovered those pain points, the value piece is like, okay, well, what do you stand to gain by if you were able to solve these pain points? What is that positive future outcome that can come? After you kind of walk through that stage of a conversation, the urgency piece, which I think most people struggle with finding ways to create urgency in sales. It's really, really hard. Obviously, the cheapest way to do it is discounting. People love to discount to create urgency, but realistically, urgency should be if you've found a meaningful pain and you've established what they have to gain by fixing that problem. The urgency piece is, what do you stand to lose? What is the opportunity cost if now you and I have agreed that you have this problem and you choose to do absolutely nothing about it? What do you stand to lose if you just stick with the status quo and stick with your pain? And then obviously the solution part is the easiest part. It's whatever the hell you sell. It's like the
Yeah.
least important part is actually what you sell. So yeah, that's so that said, that's really our approach and the underlying framework of how we design a pitch or a script at Qualia, how we go about our conversations, and that can translate to any other thing that you're trying to sell in life, or day to day things you're dealing with in your own life that have nothing to do with sales or business. So
And the one piece that I really took away from that urgency aspect too, right, is you have to be able to ask that question,
mhm,
right? It's not just maybe you thinking in your head, what does the prospect, stand to lose, lost time, lost money, whatever, they have in their gap from where they are to where they can be with your product or service. But asking the question, helping them to see that, right? So instead of it being, well, if you sign by end of year or end of month or end of quarter, we'll do X and we'll drop the price, 10%, or we'll throw this in for you, or whatever, we'll give you an extra month, or whatever it is that you can use as really kind of that crutch to get the deal done. You're only, at least from what I'm hearing from you, and in my opinion, you're only shortcutting yourself to not be able to ask that type of a question, to have that type of candor with the prospect that helps them see it in their own eyes of what is the difference and verbalize that.
absolutely. I mean, I think depending on what industry you're selling into or whatever you sell, I think um, obviously I'm a very proud salesperson, but salesperson is not necessarily the persona you want to give off to your prospect. The
Yeah.
persona is an advisor. You want to be somebody who has solutions to their problem and uh, understands them on a fundamental level and how they can solve them. So I think yeah, a salesperson is the first person to throw you a discount if you sign by end of year. But if you're an advisor and you've identified these pain points, you've talked about how they can, what they stand to gain and how they can fix it. And yeah, you do have to be able to say, okay, so if you guys, for whatever reason, don't move forward with this, you're going to continue to experience XYZ pain points. And, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want to be the one looking my boss in the face at the end of the year, knowing we had this problem, we didn't fix it. That's kind of like a
Whoo!
to the heart. Like, yeah, you have to, man, if you don't have it naturally, manufacture that level of conviction and confidence and be able to give it to your prospect.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Just while we're wrapping up here, I'd love to just touch on one last topic quickly, and that's just talking about Qualia. And you can maybe give a little, feel free to give a pitch for the business. But I'm just curious, as someone that has never worked at, I don't know if I think you're a borderline unicorn. I don't know if you've hit the valuation or you're just short, or you're in that status though. I've seen that where you're on the list, like you're one of those really hot, fast growing companies, startups. You've been there for almost 4 years at this point. So I mean, I'd just love to hear, like, what's it like to be part of such a high growth engine like that? It just must be a ton of fun.
It is a ton of fun. I'm coming up on my 4-year anniversary here in the new year at Qualia, and so much has changed. But it is really interesting as a company. There's a lot of industries out there that are ripe for disruption. If you think about hospital software, if you've ever been in the hospital, you look at the software, it's like, that looks terrible. I don't know how these people are going to keep me alive. If you look at, you go into the DMV, everything's so slow because their software is terrible. If I have a couple friends who work in personal and business insurance, and they're running like DOS programs to manage your insurance program. So there's a lot of industries that are ripe for disruption. Um, but when it comes to like figuring out a product that you want to sell, if it's easy to create the software, it's not, you're always going to have a plethora of competitors who can do things as good as you have created them. And you're never going to really like come out on top, if that makes sense. So speaking for our founders here, when they founded our company, they were looking at all those different areas and industries that could be disrupted, and it just so happened that they landed on real estate, and more specifically to start title insurance, because it's incredibly hard. It is highly regulated. Every state, county, does things differently. You're accounting for trillions of dollars in escrow funds every year. The documents are legal documents, and so it's a really hard product to build and support and all that. But because of that, um, we don't have any other competitors in the space other than what's been there since the 80s. So all of the prospects we're reaching out to have been using their same software by and large since the 80s, 90s, whatever, and the software really hasn't changed. And for whatever reason, prior to Qualia, people were okay with that. So now we're giving these legacy competitors a run for their money, and they're kind of scrambling to try to figure out how to come back. But it's difficult for them because they're built on like a an on-premise model, and they can't upload every seat license for every user that they've ever had, or they can't update it. So all that's to say, starting out at Qualia, it was difficult because there was such a long-standing reputation of just how people do title insurance on a software. And we heard things like, if you were worth knowing about, I already know about you. You're the new kid on the block. I'm not going to be a guinea pig for you. We had competitors making up just complete outright lies about us, like selling customer data and things like that. And that made it really difficult to sell to start out, even though it was like a light years ahead product. If you fast forward 4 years now, we're a thought leader in the space. Prior to COVID, we were going to hundreds of conferences a year, sponsoring those conferences. Definitely, the benchmark software in the space. So it didn't take too long for the complete perspective of what Qualia is and who Qualia is to change and come out on top. So it's a really exciting time to be here. And I know we're getting close to wrapping up, so I'll wrap up my last thought on Qualia. My team sells title insurance software. Most people have no idea what that even actually is. But when you go and you buy your home, and they give you that huge stack of documents and you have to sit there and sign them, all of that background work is being done by the title company to make sure that when you buy that house, you actually own it, and there isn't some sort of history where somebody else would actually have a claim to your property and be able to take the property. So that's what the title company is doing for you. And the title company interfaces with every other party in the transaction. So they are talking to both real estate agents, the lender, the buyer, the seller, the surveyor, everybody. And so they're really the hub. So all that's to say, there's a reason that we started with the title companies at Qualia. It's because they're the hub. Now that we've put this platform in place where it's a cloud-based, user-friendly platform that's basically the core operation of how their whole business is done, now we can begin to introduce products to lenders and to realtors that are synchronized. And so that's kind of, for anybody who's curious, that's kind of like the next feature of Qualia at this point is we're expanding outside of the title company and really focusing on the vision of just making the real estate transaction easier for every party and a lot more accessible for the consumer.
I love it, man. I love it. Well, everyone, definitely make sure to check out Qualia. Ryan, where's the best place if people want to chat about sales, if they want to hit you up about Qualia, if they have a question about where to vacation in the Caribbean, where should they contact you?
Yeah, look me up on LinkedIn. We can chat on LinkedIn, and certainly I'm open to like a quick Zoom call or a phone call with somebody, so long as you have a agenda.
All right, nice. I love
Yeah,
it.
and not interested in grabbing coffee and like talking about the weather.
Yeah, me neither. All right, man. I appreciate it. This was great.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. It's an honor. It's an honor to be on here, and certainly love what you're doing with the podcast. So you have a fan right here.
Hey, I appreciate that. Thank you so much for checking out that podcast. I hope you saw value, whether you're working out right now or doing the dishes or laying around the couch, whatever you're doing right now while you're listening to this podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found some value. If you did, the only thing that you can do to really help me out is to share this podcast with a friend, share it on social media, and please subscribe wherever you're listening, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever it is, and leave a review on Apple if that's where you're listening. That's what helps us to spread reach, helps us to get better guests like the one that you heard just now, and to give you as much value as possible. So connect with me, LinkedIn, Tom Alemo, Instagram, Twitter, Tommy Tahoe, and subscribe, leave a review, and make it a great day. Peace. Thank you so much.